Hello, everyone. So this is all about the eclipses in March and April and show you how this is likely to pan out for each sign. Now, of course, everybody has a different chart, even with the same sign rising, because we're all individual, of course. The most important thing to note is whether you have any planets at the degrees of the eclipses themselves. So at 10 degrees of Virgo or 25 degrees of Pisces. More especially the 25 degrees of Pisces mark or opposite 25 degrees in Virgo even, because this is where the solar eclipse has a longer term impact. Now you can just look at the area of your chart that these eclipses are falling in by house position from, again, your rising sign to begin with, and then your moon sign, just to get a more rounded picture of what's going on. But if you cannot do both, I would say just do rising sign and know where this is happening in your life. You can also think back to 18 or so years ago to when we had eclipses here previously. What was going on in your life back then? What changes were happening in this same section of the zodiac for you? Of course, different faces, different places. You were in different dashas, and the circumstances were very different than they are now. And so it's also very important to know what dasha you're in right now, and if it is also triggering this eclipse. Because again, like I said, if you don't have a planet there at around those degrees, it might not be affecting you that personally. It might just be a general sense of something in your chart, in your life. But for somebody who has planets at this degree or either of those degrees, and also they're in a dasha that's triggering this, then it's sort of ripe for change, I would say. And again, in relation to what that planet that's been triggered rules in their chart. So it's not just again then about the rising sign. So this is something I cannot cover here. When I go through all of the 12 signs now, I might be referring to a particular rising sign, but you might also have a planet in Pisces very closely conjunct that 25 degrees. And so it's really important to recognize what that planet rules in your chart from your rising sign. So I hope that's clear. And if it's not clear, please ask me a question. I'm here to help. And always, I think the thing about eclipses is that there's always something that's not 100% clear, and to accept perhaps that this is not going to be clear from the get-go for sure, because not only is an eclipse, but it's also a Mercury retrograde beginning between both eclipses and moving back into the eclipse sign, and then also stationing direct on the eclipse degree by the end of April. I really don't think this is going to be clear from the get-go. It's going to take a while. I mean, really the whole of April, I think, to sort itself out. Because also the other thing to note is where Jupiter is in the chart, because we usually look to Jupiter for clarity around eclipses, especially. But Jupiter itself is implicated in this eclipse because the eclipse happens in Pisces, its sign, and it's aspected by Rahu, and it's conjoining Uranus, another very Rahu-like planet. And so Jupiter isn't really giving us the clarity that we would normally get. But at the same time, as I go through each sign now, I'm going to just highlight where the eclipses are happening by house position from each sign, but also where Jupiter is in relation to that sign, because you can look to that for guidance, even if it is a bit disturbed at this time. And I do think, and I have mentioned it in the monthly forecast and in the update, the mid-month update, that this is a time of change, but I think it's necessary, and I think it's going to open our minds to new ways of doing things that we wouldn't have seen otherwise. It's kind of like you've got to have this new something or other come into your life to kind of shift everything around and sort of shift the goalposts. And then it's like, oh, actually, maybe this is possible now. Maybe you weren't thinking of something being possible, and then all of a sudden, because of something happening, now you see is something else is possible. Because I do think that there's something more positive that comes out of this. I mean, I think everything is ultimately for our betterment, but I do think there's something more positive coming out of this, even if you consider the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction and the potential for some good news, like unexpected good news that could come from this. So anyway, let's go through the signs sign by sign. Let's start with Aries. So if you're Aries rising and or moon sign, Aries, this is happening in your 6th and 12th houses with Jupiter in your first house. So obviously this has a lot to do with your daily routines, your work routines, health regimes, and being able to let go. And I think for you, Aries, more than any sign, and this is the general advice I would give everybody, but it would apply to you more specifically, is that letting go is a really important part of this picture for you, Aries, where again, if you allow things to be more, things can be more. And I think I'm always loving my mercurial kind of witty turns of phrases, but that's a good one. So if you allow things to be more, then they can be more, if you get me, right? So Pisces is all about allowing things, just surrendering something. But by doing that, actually, it can be more. It's like you leave something aside for a while, and then you come back to it a while later, and it's like, oh, okay, so now it's this, and now I can do this with it. Oh, and now this is possible. Whereas if you were not doing that and sort of trying to get it, whatever, in that meantime, you could really beat your head against the brick wall here and trying to figure it out. So again, because Mercury's retrograde and it's going to move into your sign the day after this lunar eclipse on the 25th of March, and I'll show you that here. And then it's going to back into start retrograde from April 1st in your sign, and then go back into Pisces. And then it on the 9th of April, just after the solar eclipse. So each eclipse is basically triggering a Mercury movement. Oh, that sounds a bit rude, but right, this is very mercurial of me to kind of make quips and jokes, right? But basically, this you can see here, this full moon partial lunar eclipse is ruled by Mercury, which is at the last degree of Pisces and moving into Aries. The day after, it's moved. 2 weeks later, we have the eclipse in Pisces, and then the day after that, Mercury goes back into Pisces, retrograde this time. So Mercury has a big role to play, in other words, and especially because and let me just show you actually the eclipse here on the 8th. So Mercury here is 0 degrees going back, and then the day after it goes back into Pisces. So, and then let me show you as well on the 25th, which is here, it's going to station. Look where it's stationing on the eclipse on Rahu. So, yeah, I mean, and then in the few days before then, it's obviously going to actually transit the actual eclipse degree, which is on the 16th. So really right through April, we've got this situation with Mercury. And for you, again, that's thinking about for you, again, thinking about the 6th house where this all begins. And for all of us, it's going to start with Virgo in that eclipse. And it's going to start with something kind of major in the immediate time frame cropping up to be resolved and for you to let go of. That is essentially what the initial eclipse on March 25th is about. It's eclipse with Ketu. What is it here that you need to let go of? The fact that it's Ketu, which rules the 8th house in your 6th house, is like a double negative. And that can create a positive situation. Ultimately, when the 6th lord goes to the 8th lord goes to the 6th house, the moon is the 4th lord, which is home, and it's in the 6th house, and it's bringing something up maybe in that sense, and the day-to-day life might be affected for you, Aries. But I do think that there could be some hidden aspect here, but I think also it's a double negative, so it could be a positive thing where you overcome some situation regarding debts or money or something like that, if it were a kind of practical thing like that. If it were a more sort of abstract notion of 6th and 8th house, it could be some challenge you've been going through or some obstacle, like an emotional issue that comes up and you overcome the issue. So in that sense, the letting go for you, Aries, I think is more positive than other signs. Ketu is said to be more positive in the 6th house anyway. So I think this full moon eclipse on March 25th is going to really allow you to let go of something at this point. So let me go back to it just while I'm speaking of it here. So that's the 25th here. So again, it's Ketu. A Ketu eclipse is all about letting go. And so letting go of something like the 6th house, letting go of some bad habit, letting go of some issue, some challenge, some competition, or seeing something or someone as a competition when they're in fact not, letting go of or clearing some debt, whether it's an actual physical debt like a money thing, or it's like a karmic debt, you might say. Ketu in the 6th here is showing this need to let go of something. The fact that the moon is here as well, I just think that this could show a need to emotionally let go, to cut ties with something or someone. So anyway, that's the 6th house. 6th house, by the way, is also about co-workers or employees, so people you work with, whether they work with you or below you. So yeah, maybe there's some issue here to deal with that as well. You can think about maybe letting go or overcoming something here at work. Now, again, like I said, 2 weeks later, it's the reset, the whole reset that happens on that new moon on the 8th of April, as Mercury has now begun to retrograde. Jupiter is continuing through your sign, about to conjoin Uranus. And you can see here your Mars ruler, Mars, is about to conjoin Saturn in your 11th house sign. So everything is kind of coming to a head here by the 8th, and it's a whole reset. And it's kind of like a reset that comes from a sort of tense situation that kind of gets pushed through. And yeah, everything is up for change. So the fact that it's a new moon in your 12th house, again, because things seem to be pushed through at this stage, Aries, I would say don't push any further. If I was to give you any advice, this is not the time to be pushing anything else like a new agenda here. Because even though it might seem that that's perfect timing for starting something new, there's just too many complexities here, including the Mercury retrograde, the Saturn Mars conjunction, the Uranus Jupiter conjunction. Things are not clear at all. I mean, the two planets that would bring clarity here, which is Jupiter especially, but also Mercury, they're both not well disposed at this time, I would say. Even though, like I said, there's more positive things that come out of this, just the actual eclipse itself on the 8th of April is not the time to push something through. It's a time to surrender more so. So that's the eclipse on the 8th of April. It's going to bring some insights for sure if you're, being open and willing to listen and go slow, be quiet, have a very quiet day on the 8th, and allow those to bubble up from your subconscious, I would say, even in your sleep, if you think about it. That could be a good 12th house activity to do, or certainly to meditate. I mean, more than any other sign, Aries, I would say meditation would be key for this eclipse on the 8th of April. So Aries, I hope that's a bit of help. Let's get on to Taurus. So let me go back first of all to the full moon and then bring it to Taurus. So for Taurus, this is the 5th, 11th house axis with Jupiter in your 12th house. So there is something to let go of here, just as with Aries, but maybe in a different way, because the ruler of the solar eclipse, the 11th house of gains, of ambitions, of friendship as well, is in the 12th house. And that does suggest that there's something to let go of. It could also mean money. There could be expense coming in here. And this is, even though it's a positive thing, like I said, ultimately, Jupiter Uranus conjunct in the 12th house could show this kind of unexpected expense, Taurus. So just be mindful of unexpected expense, I would say. So, but to begin with, we have the full moon partial lunar eclipse in Virgo, and that is conjunct Ketu, the remover of things. Ketu is your 7th lord in your 5th house. So there's some relationship issue going on here that maybe you're having to overcome and maybe let go of something or someone. Like this is maybe like empty nester kind of thing, like where you, if you have children, then maybe it's time to say goodbye to them. They're leaving the home or something like that. And that's a very obvious example. It might not be your example, but just as an example. So it could be letting go of something that you thought you wanted as well. That's the other thing, because it's the moon, the 3rd lord in the 5th house with the 7th lord, and it's Ketu and moon. So you can see that maybe I thought I wanted this, but I'm really not sure if this is really what I want, that kind of thing. Ketu is about removing something, ultimately. So think about what needs to go, I would say. Let's then go 2 weeks later. Then it's the 8th of April. And then this is the time to really look to Jupiter for guidance here in your 12th house. But again, because Jupiter's with Uranus, there's a bit of a kind of confusion going on here in your 12th house. Mercury retrograding there as well. What do you need to let go of? Maybe that's the confusion. Like, yeah, I know I need to let go of something or someone, but I'm really not sure what. Or maybe I need to let go of some, way of dealing with someone or relating to someone in some way, and maybe I need to change the way I relate to them. Something like that, I would imagine. So this eclipse on the 8th then is in the 11th sign, and it's very much a reset in terms of your ambitions, your bigger ambitions, and your aspirations in life. And this could obviously then show a big reset, a big change, as we're all experiencing right now. And of course, with the Saturn Mars conjunction in your 10th house, I do think that's one of the better placements of all the signs in the 10th house. It's better placed to work hard towards something, even though, again, you have to keep a really open mind with the Jupiter, Uranus, Neptune thing, or Mercury thing, but also the Neptune thing, because everything is just clustered together here around your 11th house. So it's definitely about big plans and big ambitions and goals and friendships and groups of people that you're associating with. And 11th house is the highest house of the Kama Trikona. So it's about desire. So it's the highest desire. And ultimately, all relationships have to culminate at this point. It doesn't matter what kind of relationship it is, it has to end with the 11th house. It has to, or it has to reach the 11th house status, as in it has to become, you have to become friends with them all. Whoever it is that you're entangled with, in whatever way, in the karma sense, in the desire sense, whatever relationship, ultimately you have to make friends with them. That elevates it. So I think maybe having an eclipse in your 11th house could suggest that you're changing your relationship with people. And yeah, it's going to have a big impact on you and your social life, I would say, Taurus. So I hope that's a bit of help. Next is Gemini. So again, let me go back to the eclipse on the 25th and bring it forward to Gemini. So this is happening in your 4th and 10th house, with Jupiter, the ruler of the 10th, in the 11th. So this is very much about home, work, and what you're getting from work and you're gaining from work, whether it's monetary or otherwise. There's some ambition here as well to consider with Jupiter in the 11th. And guidance maybe to experience here from friends. So maybe a friend circle or a friend or someone can guide you here where you might, be a bit lost in another way, because of course Mercury is your ruler and it's retrograde back and forth between Pisces and Aries during this eclipse. It conjoined Rahu, the eclipse degree. Yeah, it's kind of like the details are very sketchy. And so it might not be a bad idea to actually seek guidance from a friend, a loyal friend, and a friend that you know who's going to give you good advice, that is, without overdoing that as well. And of course, with Uranus conjoined Jupiter, you might have surprises there as well in terms of, work surprises for sure, relationship surprises. There could be some pleasant surprise too. Keep an open mind about it. Relationships at work itself, they could improve, but they're going to change, I would say, throughout this period. There's the big changes on the horizon here. And again, that's not a bad thing. It could be a pleasant change. It could be a surprising change initially, but then it works out for everybody in the end. So now again, starting with the full moon in Virgo, conjoined Ketu, your 6th lord in the 4th house, is something happening at home initially by the 25th of March. And, it's home and family and all these very personal things. And maybe there's some conflict to be dealt with here and to get over and to remove. So maybe also thinking about practically doing something in the home and getting rid of something. Like we are coming into spring for most people. So maybe it's a good time to do a spring clean. That might be all that suggests. A lot of the times with eclipses, it's not always big events that happen in people's lives. It's just sometimes really practical, down to earth, simple things like that. Like maybe you just need to do a spring clean. But of course, more, um, I'd say in a deeper way, this suggests you need to do an emotional detox, like a cleanse, like there's something to let go of here emotionally for sure. Could be some financial issue as well because of the moon there, of course, and the 6th lord. So it could be money debts and something around the home. Yeah, something like that. But again, this is the moon and it's an immediate thing and it's not a long-term impact. So it might not be a long-term thing for you anyway. 2 weeks later, we have that eclipse in Pisces in your 10th house of work and career and vocation and direction in life. So there obviously is a change of direction here in terms of what you're doing and why you're doing it, and maybe to consider why you're doing it more than anything with Jupiter. And, with Mercury, your ruler, now about to retrograde back from Aries into Pisces the day after this eclipse. The details are sketchy, as I said, for everybody. But I think for you, Gemini, you're going to really feel a bit sort of overwhelmed, perhaps, with all of the stuff that's going on now. And you're not maybe clear about what to do at this point. But it's okay because again, everything gets ironed out, everything gets worked out. Keep an open mind, keep positive, and you'll notice that something positive will come out of this. I do think ultimately, if we're ending with, what is happening at the end of this whole, all of these planets gathering together, it's Jupiter. Jupiter conjunct Uranus. It's like something surprising, but something I think good surprising. So yeah, you have to think about Mars and Saturn, of course, in your 9th house, and think about the pressure that you might be feeling there in terms of doing something more meaningful in your life when we consider Jupiter as well to represent that in a general sense. So maybe there's something that's happening around work that's meaningful or not meaningful, and then you want to change it, and then you're wondering what you can get out of it. A very obvious example is somebody who wants to do something more meaningful with their work, but then they think, well, I don't want to leave this job because it's a secure job, and maybe, I need to think about that. I meet people all the time who are thinking about changing their job, but they're thinking about the security and the money, and how that might be impacted. So I'm not saying that's happening with you necessarily, Gemini, but it could be a general theme of just work, and why are you doing what you're doing, and what are you getting out of it, essentially. So this eclipse on April 8th might throw up some of these kind of conundrums for you, shall we say. Always look to Jupiter, like I said, and maybe again getting some advice from somebody. So that's Gemini. Hope that has helped. Let me go forward to Cancer. So let's go back first of all to the 25th. Of course, Cancer, your moon is always involved in the eclipse, just as with Leo, the sun is always involved. You have to have the sun and moon and the earth line up. So the reason we don't have eclipses every month is because, well, the sun and moon and earth line up every month for a new and full moon. But when the Rahu Ketu also line up on the ecliptic, then there's an eclipse. They just have to be close enough to the ecliptic as they are this time. And they're very close, obviously, for the solar eclipse. It's not as close for the lunar on the 25th, but it's still close. So you're impacted by this, obviously, and you have to be, mindful of that, Cancer, because you're very sensitive anyway. Thinking about your third house in terms of, and the fifth lord there, if you have children, if you have, just any sort of sense of what you want to do and how you're engaging with your children would be important right now. But any engagement with your plans at all, there's something that you have to perhaps get rid of in a way. It's like maybe it's a behavior that you're, another example, a simple example that maybe not everyone will relate to, but it's like there's a behavior that your child has and you're trying to maybe change that behavior. That maybe would be one way that you could express this Ketu moon conjunction in the third. But if for another person, it could be that there's something they would love to do, and then they know they know what it takes to do it, perhaps, but like they need to get rid of things more than anything else. They need to simplify. Ketu is very much about simplifying things down. So let's get to the core, the essence of this thing so that I can do this thing. And what is this thing anyway? What do I want? Third house is very much about what you want and how you go about getting what you want and how you express that, like communicate it clearly to another person, to yourself even. That's third house. Siblings are, of course, a big part of this. And so there could be some issue here coming up with siblings. And of course, 2 weeks later, then it's the eclipse in the ninth house, which is the father. And if it's not siblings and father, it could be what they relate to, which is, again, getting what you want, fighting for what you want even, and also what is it that you want? What is giving your life meaning and purpose? What do you believe is possible? And for you, more than any sign, I would say, well, it is the case for all of us, but for Cancer, I would say that this is something to be mindful of. What I said in the beginning, there's something here that we have to let go of, and that by letting go of it, in like letting go of the way we think things should be, something can be something more, actually. And that's again related to the ninth house. So this is the eclipse 2 weeks later on the 8th of April. Ninth house is about what you believe is possible. It's not just about belief systems as people talk about ninth house. It's about like religion and philosophy and beliefs. Yes, it's about that and your guiding principles, but it's also about just what you believe is possible. And with Pisces as your ninth lord, which is ruled by Jupiter, and Jupiter is conjoining Uranus right now, it's kind of like it could feel like anything is possible in a way, and anything is possible in a way. But unless you can actually focus, which is what Saturn is doing here with its conjunction with Mars, that's a good combination to just get focus, because anything is possible, but I need to actually focus on what I really want. And what I believe is possible is what's going to happen, right? If you believe it's going to happen, it's going to happen. So to think about that and to think about all of these things is going to be important around the eclipse on April 8th, especially in your ninth house. And because it's all coming to a head here, again, keep an open mind about it. And especially with Mercury's retrograde in and out of your ninth and 10th, test it out a while, test out your theories. Is that possible? Is that true? Can I do that? Is it possible? Is that true? Can I do that? Like, do it a few times. Don't like just, take it like the first time. around. It's going to be a couple of times around, at least with Mercury's retrograde. So yeah, so try it out a few times before everything kind of gets worked out in more detail later on, which will happen probably later on in April or even into May. So Cancer, hope that's helpful. Let's go to the next one, which is Leo. And let's go back to the eclipse on the 25th. So for you, Leo, again, like with Cancer, the luminaries are involved in the eclipses every time. And so the luminaries are getting eclipsed. So for you, Leo, I would say this is more so the case because of that total solar eclipse of your ruler, the sun in your eighth house, which is itself kind of hidden. So for you, Leo, I would say there's some monetary issue here, most likely with the second and eighth house axis and Jupiter in the ninth house, aspecting your first house. There could be, again, some good news coming out of a messy situation, I would say, Leo. Now, when I say messy, I mean that there could be second and eighth house and eclipses kind of don't gel well together generally. Because second and eighth, you want to keep secure and stable because it's about literally that security and stability. And second and eighth house eclipses show that everything's changing. So financial changes, family dynamics are changing. You know, that's not a bad thing, like I said, because again, it could be some surprising news. Like the obvious that I can think of is like gaining from an inheritance, which would be one expression of this. The eighth lord, the eclipse, and in its the ninth house and conjunct Uranus, like surprise from nowhere. Like, you know, maybe it's a good time to do the lottery. I don't know. I'm not encouraging gambling now, but yeah, Leo, I think are going to be, because of Jupiter's aspect to Leo, more especially, after all of this is said and done, I think going to benefit from this. But it's not going to feel like that initially, is what I'm saying. Because again, coming back to the new moon or the full moon on March 25th, conjunct Ketu in Virgo in your second sign. I know Leos because I've been reading for Leos, and I know Leos have been having difficulty financially. There've been changes going on financially with Ketu moving through their second sign. What I want to say about that ultimately is that Jupiter moving into Taurus by May is going to aspect the second sign and improve finances. So hang on in there in that sense. But there's nothing wrong here either. It's just Ketu in the second sign can sometimes sort of disrupt the sort of stability of the second sign, you know, and we want the second sign to be stable more than anything else. So just be mindful of that around this full moon and maybe bringing up some insecurity because it's the moon, this 12th lord, and the fourth lord Ketu, the home, something to do with finances and some loss here or expense, shall we say, in the home. You're maybe having to pay out something around some issue or something around the home, or for some other reason around your mother, or for some reason around something that you really want. You know, whatever it is, there's something that maybe has to be let go of here in terms of money. So maybe you're going to have to part with a bit of money right now. You know, if it's like if you really want something and you think it's going to make you happy, then yeah, maybe you have to spend a bit of money on it. That's the fourth lord in the second house, Ketu, conjunct the moon, the 12th lord. You're going to have to maybe spend here. 2 weeks later, then, on the 8th, we have the eclipse in your eighth house. So that is, and again, now, whether this is your rising sign or moon sign, if it's your moon sign, the moon eighth from the moon, eighth from the eighth, is a bit more challenging for Leo. So the moon in the eighth from the moon, again, if you have moon in Leo, in Pisces, creates a bit of a couple of days of psychic sort of disturbance in a way. It's always a good time of the month, anytime for anybody, by the way. The moon is the eighth from where it is in your chart, to take a couple of days out and to just meditate more and to relax more and to try and give yourself a bit of a break, because it's usually a bit more emotionally a bit of a tumultuous time. This is the case for Leo at this time, but more especially now because it's an eclipse. So go easy on yourself. Don't expect too much from yourself or from other people. There's things changing here that are uncertain, a lot of uncertain changes going on, together with the fact that Jupiter is conjoining Uranus, just provides further change. But again, I'm just saying it's going to be more positive ultimately, I think, even though if it feels very shaky initially. And then also the Mercury retrograding back into Pisces. And until the end of April, this kind of confusion around the details about it's I think it's very much to do with money for you, Leo, in a practical way, because it's the second and 11th Lord Mercury. That's where the eclipse is happening first and the second, and then it's culminating the 8th with Mercury going back in there. It seems to be a lot to do with money and the gains, and there could be some power struggles going on here in the family dynamics as well, and with friends and gains and income and stuff like that. And then you throw in a Mars Saturn, conjunction in your seventh house, and then you're adding in just more tension. So just be mindful, be easy, go easy with yourself and with others, I would say, at this time, Leo. It's all going to iron out in the end. It's all going to come out in the wash anyway. So next is Virgo. So let's go back to the eclipse on the 25th first, and let's go forward to Virgo. So of course, Virgo, it's in your sign and opposite, and Jupiter is in your 8th sign with Uranus. So it just highlights some changes going on for you very personally and in your relationships. Because of course, one is the same as the other. Everybody in your life is like a mirror. And this shows that you're going through some very deep inner changes. And those deep inner changes, even if they don't appear on the outside as yet, they might have already started to appear on the outside. As in, you may be making changes even externally. If this is your rising sign, you could even be making physical changes. Maybe you're cutting your hair differently, or you're wearing different clothes, or, there's something changing in you now in a very deep, fundamental way with Ketu moving through your sign. That this moon, this full moon, is obviously going to show something that maybe you need to let go of. I've seen it myself, experienced it myself with Ketu moving through my sign when I shave my head, as an example. That, yeah, I'm not saying you should go and shave your head, but Ketu is kind of like that, moving through the sign. It's like it's kind of like something drastic. I need to make a change. I want to get rid of something. Again, that could be a spring clean, that could be a detox for you, Virgo. Who knows? But I do think the moon here, maybe it's a social detox as well, because the moon is the 11th Lord. Maybe there's some friends or a friend or associations that you're hanging around with, people. Maybe I just want to change that. Maybe that's what all you're thinking about. But again, because you're going through so much change, your relationships are going to go through so much change, because the third, the seventh, and 11th, all the social houses, you might say, are, impacted by this eclipse. So that's the full moon on the 25th. Then 2 weeks later, we have a full moon in your seventh house. And of course, this is going to show big changes going on in your relationship, because if you're changing, like I said, your relationships are changing. They have to. And it's going to create some tension perhaps in your relationship, especially with the conjunctions either side of the seventh house. But to be mindful of this is to be slow and to consider Mercury's retrograde throughout this whole period from the 1st to the 25th of April, and how uncertain this all is, but also how necessary it all is as well. And all of these changes absolutely must happen. I mean, you will see this in time, I would say, but initially you might be like, I don't know what's going on here. I don't know what I need to do. And what's he talking about anyway? You might not even understand what I'm talking about right now. That's okay, because ultimately, whether this affects you very obviously in a very upfront way because you have your ascendant degree very close to the eclipse or planets here, or whatever that planet represents in your life, you'll notice the changes over time anyway. It's not always on the eclipse day itself, by the way, that anything actually happens necessarily. It is a culmination point in one way energetically, but it doesn't always mean something happens. And in fact, I think Mercury, subsequently your ruler, moving over the eclipse degree in your seventh house in April. Remember, by 16th of April, it is conjoined the eclipse degree, and then by the 25th, it stations on the North Node Rahu. So that could be changes for you personally also, but professionally, because it's your 10th Lord as well and embroiled in all of this. So again, think about maybe your professional relationships as well as your romantic relationships. And Virgo, I think you've got a lot of changes to do, obviously, but they're all happening anyway. You don't have to do anything necessarily. So moving on then let me move it forward to Libra. So the 25th, we have the full moon in the 12th, and then we have the opposite 6th house eclipse. So the 6th and 12th house, just as with Aries, but then reversed. And Libra is one of the more, in a way, complicated signs in one way. I don't like to say that about any one sign, but the reason that I'm saying that is especially because of this axis of the 6th and the 12th of Pisces and Virgo. because Virgo is more like the sixth. It's, it's all about the sixth. Libra is more like the seventh, but it's the first. Scorpio is more like the eighth, but it's in the second. Everything is reversed for Libra. And you might say that it creates this kind of interesting dynamic that I've seen this a lot with Libras, where they're almost like always thinking about other people first. They always put other people first, so they're always considering other people alongside them at least. This is, something to think about. This is what you do. But during this period where these things get reversed even more, or again, sixth and 12th. So what I mean is the sixth house normally is where you're getting focused on the details and working it out and doing all of that. But then this is Pisces for you, which is not detail orientated at all. It's just open. And then Rahu is exaggerating all of that. Whereas on the other side, Virgo is usually very detail orientated, but it's in the 12th house where you're having to let go of all the details, and especially with Ketu. So this hyper focus, potentially Libra, that you're having on problems, but then at the same time not being very clear about the details of the problem is likely. So Libra, I would suggest that you, especially during the eclipses during this year with the nodes in these two signs, that you obviously let go of whatever problems you need to let go of, but make sure that you know what you need to let go of and what you don't need to. Try and differentiate, try and use Virgo's strengths, which is the ability to discriminate between what's right and wrong. It's between what you need to let go of and what you shouldn't. But like I said, and with all signs, it just might not be clear what you need to at this stage, with Mercury now as well about to retrograde. So it can be a bit of a conundrum for you, Libra, in other words. So just again, for the full moon on the 25th, especially around that time, consider what needs to go. And then 2 weeks later, for the new moon and eclipse, with Jupiter, remember, in your seventh house, relationships will be key here in balancing all of this out. This eclipse is going to obviously get you to focus on what needs to be done. What are the steps that you need to put in place to get to where you want to go? Who is going to help you get there? And I think, yeah, though the pressure might be on to do something, make sure that no one's pressurizing you into doing anything at this point, because nobody should do anything important around an eclipse. I mean, I don't think anybody would argue with that. No astrologer would advise anybody to do something important on the eclipse on the 8th. And then you throw in Mercury retrograde in your 7th, going back into your 6th and working all of these details out. It's just not clear. So if you're not clear about it, and it's not going to be clear until the end of April, work them out for sure, but don't sign on the dotted line. Don't make any agreements. Don't, even just don't do anything right now. If you can, if you have to, you do what you must, of course, but don't do anything you don't have to do, I would say. And that is, again, finding a balance between the 6th and 12th here is tricky, but you can do it. And then once you figure out all of that, your life will become more balanced, which is your end goal, Libra. So next sign is Scorpio. Let's go back to Scorpio. So this is the full moon eclipse in your 11th sign and the other eclipse in your 5th with Jupiter in your 6th. This is the axis, the 5th and 11th is all about your loves and your ambition. And you know what? They seem to be disparate parts, but of course everything is connected. But it seems more disparate and separate when the nodes are in these signs. So, just like with Taurus, it's the same thing. Again, if there were children involved and then friends on the other side of the equation, oftentimes that it does happen when somebody's focus is so much on their children. Because if you have a child, literally you have to focus on them so much, especially when they're so young. But even so, if they're not young, if you're focusing on your child, or if you're focusing on what you love to do and you are only thinking about what you want, that's Rahu in the 5th house, then you can easily reject other people who are doing what they want, and then blame other people for doing what they want, and blame others instead of yourself for not doing what you want. So yeah, you can see how complicated this can get. It's like I gave an example before because this is my rising sign of I'm like doing lots of social events right now. That's 11th house, but Ketu in my 11th house is showing that nothing is as satisfying me at all. It's like nothing is reaching the mark. It's just not hitting the spot. Moon here, full moon eclipse is likely to bring this to a head and help me realize that all of this fault finding is not getting me anywhere. And instead, I'm better turning my attention to what it is I love to do. Instead of complaining about what I don't like, it'd be better to focus on what I love, not just like. That's the fifth house. So whether, again, that's a child for you versus a friend you need to let go of, or whether it's a project you're working on versus an ambition you need to let go of, or a thing you love to do versus your socializing that you need to let go of. I'm also thinking of getting rid of social accounts like social media accounts because I want to focus on what I love. So that's the 5th and 11th houses for Scorpio. So the 2 weeks later, eclipse on the 8th in the 5th house. Of course, again, it's bringing it to a head in a way, and it might be more tense for you as well because of what's happening in the home as well. Mars, Saturn conjunct in your 4th house. Saturn's aspect on your 6th with Jupiter conjunct Uranus. Jupiter giving that guidance and how you need to go forward, the steps that are required, and it might feel like a bit of a slog kind of getting through the steps. But I do think there's a breakthrough on the horizon for you, Scorpio, in terms of, if you're putting the work in and you're putting the effort in, that 6th house. If it's a health issue that, things can come right, there might be some insight into how you can solve a problem, whether it's a health problem or a work problem or an everyday problem. So yeah, just try and go easy on yourself as well because of the Mars Saturn conjunction by the beginning of April and that eclipse, because things are going to feel pressurized and you might feel really tense in trying to get something done. And when you add the Mars Saturn to an eclipse, it just feels even more urgent and it feels like it has a time stamp. And it's like if you don't use it up in this time, it's going to be expired. You can see the issue here, Scorpio. So try and ease up on that a bit and consider, maybe getting advice as well, literal, like maybe even legal advice, I would say. That's Jupiter in the 6th house, but also just 6th house every day matters, Co-workers especially could help here, maybe give you some insight. Even your competition, that 6th house could give you some insight into how to go forward with this. If you're competing with someone, instead of seeing them as an enemy, see them as a friend, an ally. That's Jupiter in the 6th house. So next sign is Sagittarius. So let's first of all go back to the eclipse on the 25th. This is the moon, full moon with Ketu in the 10th house, and then the other eclipse in your 4th house with Jupiter in your 5th. So obviously this is a lot to do with work and home and change around both work and home. And the reason I say both work and home is because Jupiter in the 5th, now the 5th house is the 8th from the 10th. That's something to consider. And it generally shows changes in work. But in this case, it's maybe not specifically, but there could be some change that has to happen, sure. But because it's the 4th house ruler, Jupiter in the 5th, that could show some change in that respect. That, maybe there's some plans that you're, making around home. And so this obviously shows some changes going on in work and home life, essentially. And the eclipse on the 25th might again bring something up quite intensely. Initially, it's the 8th Lord and your 12th Lord in the 10th house. That does show that there's some unforeseen, maybe circumstances, maybe something that you need to let go of that crops up. I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily in a way, because if you think about Ketu as removing things, what would you want to remove? It's the 8th and 12th house matters you'd probably want to remove. So that could be a positive thing in terms of removing an obstacle that's in your way in what you're doing at work, potentially. So 2 weeks later, then you have that eclipse in your 4th house on the 8th of April. And this is, of course, all about home. And there's an issue arising here, obviously, for Sagittarius people around home. Now, whether Sagittarians are moving home or not, or whether they're creating changes in their home, there's some change going on. And it's probably going to, rear its head now in April. And because of these conjunctions either side, including the ruler of your 4th house, Jupiter, conjoined Uranus in your 5th, I do think, again, that's ultimately a more positive thing that gets worked out in all of this situation that could feel initially quite tense in terms of what you're doing. Like, it's not, for most people, I don't think, an enjoyable experience moving home. Even if you weren't moving home, if you were doing renovations or whatever, it's usually tense. So to accept that maybe there's tension there around that, but to also be open-minded and to stay positive about the changes or the plans that you're making around the home that likely this year into next year are going to happen because of the eclipses. Now, it's more likely, again, if you've got points here, where the eclipses are. Remember, this eclipse is at 25 degrees. So think about that. as maybe being closer, if that were closer to your ascendant degree, 25 degrees, for example. Or if you've got planets here, that those planets will be implicated, drawn into the home, and those things having to be dealt with at home as well. Rahu usually brings them up, and it will, keep bringing it up this year with the eclipse, but also with the transits of planets over this. The Sun, Mercury, like I said, in April, Sun obviously in April, and Mars later on. And, so there's definitely something to be mindful of here, of the changes that are going on in your house, in your home. And to keep an open mind about the plans that you're making. If you have children, to consider that too, because Jupiter's transit in your fifth house, you don't often think about, well, getting guidance from my children. Well, yeah, they're actually the Jupiter rules children. Jupiter rules teachers, gurus. Children are like little gurus when you think about it. They're like teachers. They are teaching us the way. They are like born ready. They're in, they are the future. That's what Jupiter and the fifth house both represent. So I do think ultimately this is positive for Sagittarius. I mean, even if Sagittarius, you don't have a child or any children, it's still more positive. But certainly, I think children are a very positive expression of this kind of transit, because it again shows that kind of future orientated Jupiter transit in the fifth, which is so positive ultimately. So again, that's the ultimate thing. Jupiter is the kind of leading the pack in a way, and Jupiter will pass Uranus and then really be the leader of the pack. So making plans after these eclipses, I think for you Sagittarius, will be so important. And again, think about the bigger picture here with Jupiter. So Capricorn is the next one, and we'll go back to the eclipse on the 25th. So Capricorn, for you, it's the third and ninth house, starting in your ninth house, that lunar eclipse, and then in your third house with Jupiter in your fourth house. So there could also be changes here, and there have been changes, a lot of changes in the home life for Capricorns. I mean, I've been hearing about that from a lot of Capricorns over the last few years, because of all of the changes, all of the eclipses, in other words, that happened in the fourth house. But now the changes are happening in the third house, and it's about travel. Third and ninth house is all about travel. It's all about thinking. It's all about communicating. It's all about working things out and discussing things, and what you believe. And again, as I mentioned about the ninth house, it's also what you believe is possible. So this eclipse on the 25th with Ketu and the moon, the seventh lord, and that signifying the relationship or a relationship or any relationship, could suggest that there's something to let go of here that is in a way blocking you from seeing the potential here in a relationship. It could be a more immediate thing. I'm not saying that that's maybe a long-term impact, but certainly there could be an immediate thing to overcome with your partner, to be able to listen more, to be able to, just be with them more, or to whatever. There's something to remove here. Ketu in general in the ninth house also is about just changing your beliefs around something. I think that's quite clear. Jupiter's subsequent transit in Taurus aspecting Ketu here will highlight that theme as well of, just thinking about things differently, I would say. Jupiter is the third lord, and now going to the eclipse on the 8th, and its position in the fourth house with Uranus does show a need to communicate something differently about what you want, and to be very clear about what you want. So obviously, if you're clear about what you want, you're going to be able to communicate that more effectively. So that's a bit of a challenge with Mercury retrograde from your fourth back into your third with the eclipse there. It's really hard to communicate something very clearly about what you want when what you want is changing so much right now. And what's happening is the third house is getting really stirred up for you. And although the third house is all about making effort, because the third house ruler, Jupiter, also represents your 12th lord about surrender, I would say the best of advice, as I've given at the top of this recording, is surrender is the best tactic. It's almost like the best strategy at this point, to surrender your will to the divine will, if you want to put it that way. That there's something bigger here that maybe you're not seeing if you get too focused on, making your own effort. And then it's all just about you making effort. It's not just about your effort. It's about, tapping into something bigger, I would say, at this point, Capricorn. And again, as I mentioned, the third and ninth house is very much about travel practically. And the fourth house is like a vehicle. So there could be some changes going on here around traveling. Just be mindful, I would say, around these changes, and as things iron out until even the end of April, I would say. And again, as I'm saying with all the signs, to be more open-minded and think more positively about the changes that are ultimately happening here and how this can ultimately lead to a better home situation. And one last thing I think about that when I think about the third and fourth houses and the ninth house opposite the third, and it's like, and the 10th house opposite the fourth, it's like if you go on a trip and you love the trip, but then you come home and it's like, oh, I'm home, right? Or you go to work and you might love your work, but you come home and you're like, oh, I'm home. So that's the kind of dynamic that's going on here for you, Capricorn. So next sign is Aquarius. Let's go back to the eclipse, first of all, on the 25th. So Aquarius, this is in your second and eighth house with Jupiter in your third. So it starts in your eighth house with Ketu, your 10th lord in your eighth house, some changes at work, perhaps. The sixth lord moon is implicated as well. So it does kind of confirm that kind of change that has to happen at work or what you're working on even. And this is not a bad thing, like I said. And perhaps Ketu in the eighth house is good in a sense because it removes any blockages in one way, you might say. But I would say in another way, the eighth house are about things that, we also need to deal with and not want to like sweep under the rug. So Ketu here can sometimes show that where you're not dealing with things. It's like, again, like we would think about Virgo as a problem. Like there's a problem that you're not dealing with, maybe. But if you are able to look at the problem and deal with it, the potential here is great in order to overcome a challenge at work. Like there's a thing you've been trying to work out and it hasn't been clear or you haven't been able to figure it out. But maybe this full moon is like the resolution you need around it, the kind of insight you gain from that. Then the 2 weeks later, then we have the eclipse in your second sign and the ruler Jupiter in your third. Saturn and Mars coming together in your first. It's really going to feel quite tense now for you, I'd say, Aquarius. That's not bad necessarily. It's getting you to focus at least. And this eclipse in your second sign will get you to focus on what's important to you, what you value, and literally your valuables, like your money, your bank balance. Maybe that's going through changes. Family dynamics, family members might be going through some changes themselves. And how all this it reflects in what you're doing and where you're traveling. Maybe you need to travel for that reason. Maybe you need to think about how you're communicating or not with family members, as an example. Jupiter in your third, maybe seeking, advice from others, maybe it's a sibling that you're having to deal with or not dealing with, and maybe it would be good to talk to your sibling or, listen to what they have to say about something about the family or something like that. All of these are just potentials. It's not necessarily going to play out in this obvious way, but it could be a more subtle way for you. It could be money matters, as I mentioned as well, for Leos, for Aquarius, it's the same, but reversed. Money matters, second and eighth house. Here again, there could be something to let go of in terms of eighth house matters, where it's like, it's, instead of waiting for that like pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, as it were, ninth house or eighth house is like that kind of like unexpected windfall or something. Maybe Ketu is suggesting, not to be waiting for that pot of gold, but Rahu in the second house is about being self-reliant and resourceful and, you know, earning your own money, instead of relying on other people or whether it's your partner or others. So this might show your need to be more self-reliant, I would say. But it could also, of course, churn up some issues around this. And like I said with Leo, this is probably one of the more challenging aspect ratios here because of the second and eighth house being things that we want to keep very stable and secure to make us feel safe. But the eclipses here are really churning it up and making us feel like things are changing, even if it's just in our, in our bank balance. Everything feels a bit uncertain, and or whether it's families or, whether it's your family or your in-laws or whoever it is, there's some changes going on in family and finances. And that is something just to be mindful of. Of course, as well, second house represents food, diet, thinking about maybe going to extremes there and not overdoing it. Maybe a good day to take a fast, maybe on the eclipse itself on the 8th. And to think, yeah, maybe about doing some sort of all kinds of fasts, like media fast, diet, no food, quietness. Just try and gain some insight here. Because the second house is also about vision, Aquarius. So maybe there's some, insight that you'll gain here more probably if you're not taking in too much, I would say. And then subsequently, as everything gets ironed out, Jupiter in the third can help you communicate that to other people and again to yourself. and others. To be clear about something is to be clear with other people. You're not going to necessarily be clear or maybe even expressing yourself as clearly with the Mercury retrograde and the Jupiter Uranus conjunction around this eclipse period. But eventually, again, by the end of April, as everything gets ironed out, clarity then can be forthcoming with Jupiter leaving or passing Uranus and moving forward in your third house. Ultimately making it to your fourth house in Taurus by May, as I mentioned, and aspecting your Virgo sign. And therefore, then I think things can maybe settle down more so in terms of all of these maybe financial matters as well. And I think that will be a very settling time for you with Jupiter in your fourth house from May 1st. So that's Aquarius. And then finally, Pisces. So let me go back first to the eclipse on the 25th. So the eclipse on the 25th is in your 7th with the 8th of April in your 1st. Obviously, this is huge for you, Pisces. Just as it is for Virgo, but in a way even more so for you, Pisces, for quite obvious reasons, because it's a Rahu solar eclipse, a total solar eclipse in your sign, with all of these planets in your sign and all the other planets opposite or either side of your sign. So in a sense, really, it's all hinging on Pisces this month and into April. And that's for all of us. So that again means letting go, surrendering to what's happening. Even when we think like, what the hell is happening? And we don't know what's happening. It's going to be hard for many people, but we all have to. For you, Pisces, very personally, and it's very personal for you, there's a change that you're going through in a very fundamental way. And it can really make you feel maybe amazing in many ways as well, but it's also going to feel probably quite intense. And, you know, just to be mindful around this time, especially leading up to the April eclipse, to go easy on yourself and those around you. And, you know, whether it's family members and people around you, your relationships, everybody around you, really, because all of these planets are gathered in your sign and opposite and either side. So it's really all kind of everybody around you. Now, that suggests also that there's too many people around you, and that it's very hard to kind of gain perspective when you're kind of everyone's around you and everything's so busy and you're doing so much, and you add in an eclipse and then a Mercury retrograde on top of that, and it's like, oh my God, there's just too much going on. How can I really work all of this out? You know, and then you're always trying to work everything out for everybody anyway. You're Piscean, so you take on everything of everybody. So maybe at this time, the advice would be not to as take on more than you need to, because there's already a lot going on. So starting off with this full moon eclipse on the 25th in your seventh house, this is the time with your fifth Lord Moon and your ninth Lord Ketu in your seventh to perhaps let go of something in terms of plan that you've been making with your partner, some wish that you have maybe about something, or maybe they are doing that. Maybe they are letting go of something or they're changing something, but your relationship has to change anyway in one way or the other. All relationships in your life have to change in a sense at this time, and they will change and they will improve. And subsequently, Jupiter will move into Taurus, and then it will aspect your seventh sign, so and your 11th, and it will just make it easier, I think, and smooth out a lot of these changes. And that ultimately is positive. And I think the most positive thing for you to recognize is Jupiter moving away from all of these Saturn Rahu aspects. And you know, it's even its conjunction with Uranus, as you know, as thrilling as it might be and as exciting and new as it might be, it's still shaking things up. And you know, it's just nice to have a Jupiter sort of settling into some sign, like in Taurus, it's more settled. Yes, it's with Uranus, but Uranus is going to move back later on in the year, and then Jupiter will stay in Taurus. So that just feels to me more settled in a way. Now, having said that, on top of that, it's your third sign. So settled as in, yeah, enjoying some socializing and some relationships and good times, you know, that's no bad thing. Um, but at least it looks more settled ultimately. This looks quite, you know, scattered, all of these energies, starting with this full moon in your seventh house, bringing something up maybe quite immediately. And then 2 weeks later, that eclipse on the 8th of April in your sign. At the end of your sign with planets either side, Saturn, Mars conjoined, Uranus, your ruler, and or Jupiter, your ruler, and Uranus, Mercury about to move back into your sign the day after, all of it culminating into this eclipse, really this reset point in your life. And in so many areas of your life that really, I think it's changing everything for you, Pisces, in so many different subtle ways, maybe, but it's still changing things. And then that will ultimately create more obvious changes in your life around you and in you. So don't ask too much of yourself, I would say, Pisces, at this time. You're already probably asking a lot. Rahu tends to do that. Rahu, even though it's your 12th lord, and itself is asking you to surrender. You know, this is the whole point. More than any sign, Pisces, you are the sign of surrender. And it's not just because you're Pisces, it is that. But it's also because the one planet that does not want to surrender is Rahu, but it rules the 12th house, which is all about wanting to surrender. So it's like, you know, it's kind of like, it's no matter where you look, it's like Pisces is showing this need for surrender. It's like you just have to let go constantly. And I think Rahu's transit and eclipse now in your sign by 8th of April is showing and is allowing you to surrender. If that's even a phrase we can use, allowing you to surrender. And I think go with it, go with the flow here, trust it, have faith in the process. You know, it'll all work out. Don't worry, don't sweat the small stuff at this point. The details will work themselves out, whether it's you're dealing with an issue at home and with your partner or whoever, that there are things going on in your family and things in terms of money and finances and whatever and community. And there's all these things to work out. And maybe you're surrounded by things and people to work things out, but it will all get worked out. So try and kind of hold space for yourself as much as you are for other people at this point, I would say, Pisces. So, folks, that took me a bit longer than I thought it would. And I thought, you know, as I was going through it, I thought, yeah, there's a lot more to say here, of course, every time. And everybody is going to experience it in their own unique way. It doesn't matter what sign you have, rising, moon sign, whatever. You know, the only way I could actually point this out more specifically about anybody is to look at your chart. And of course, I can't do that in this kind of public forum. So I hope you got something from it. I hope you have more insight into what this eclipse is about. Don't forget to keep an eye on Jupiter and the insights that are available there, the guidance that maybe somebody in that sign is going to be able to bring for you. But even just being still with this eclipse, I think, is just important. And yeah, if you have any questions, of course, feel free to post below if something wasn't clear. If you're not clear about your sign, and I get messages sometimes, people who aren't actually still clear about their sign who might have been following me for a while. I really hope that you can feel like you can reach out. You can email me as well if you don't want to send a message here with this post. So just email me at info@timelineastrology.com and I can work out, you know, your rising sign or moon sign or whatever you want. And yeah, I hope it helps. And we shall see how all of this pans out, of course. And I will be speaking to you anyway on the 31st of March, hopefully. That is the next gathering and discussion for these eclipse and everything else that's happening in April. That's just the one thing I pointed out, the eclipse and the Mercury retrograde. There's a lot going on in April. So we're meeting on the 31st of March at 7 p.m. British Standard Time. Hope you can join me. I'll actually put a link below with this, but I'll send links out again as well. And yeah, I hope to see you then. And until next time.